Ravi, please tell us who you are and why did you become a conservationist?
That's a very interesting question. Nobody has asked that in my life as to who you are, but I get a sense of what you want to know. I come from South India. I grew up in a Tamil Brahmin family, middle class. I'm the eldest of four sons. And right from childhood, the aspiration was to be a medical doctor. I'm 61 born, so I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, going to school. Wildlife as a career was nowhere in the horizon. But it's also the time when global change, as we call it now, climate change, global warming. I mean, acid rain was a real issue, not um, sea level rise was a real issue. Things were coming home. And so one was aware, but not from a professional career sense. At that time, we did schooling without having to choose any subjects. You would do 11 years of school and then do a year of pre-university, which is when you would make choices. And I think in the late 70s, there were only 4 or 5 respectable professions. And you either turned out to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or a banker. That's about all. I mean, one didn't know the options. So I chose to do natural science, which would have allowed me to become qualify for a doctor's medical admission. But as luck would have it, despite getting fairly good scores, I didn't get admission. Ended up doing a bachelor's degree in botany. It was badly taught, killed all my interest in science, gave me a lot of time to play cricket, and I enjoyed myself. But one thing at the end of 3 years I knew was I was not going to do an MSc in botany. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I clearly knew what I didn't want to do. So as luck would have it, just as I was finishing, I got a job. For 2 years, I worked as a marketing executive, selling industrial and textile chemicals. All along, the interest in nature has been there innate, largely through books. This is pre-television, pre-mobile phone. I know you get magazines and newspapers, but otherwise no on BBC, on shortwave radio. Those are my sources of information. And as luck would have it, our cricketing club shared space with the local WWF office. And then one thing led to the other, and I started working with them as a volunteer, got exposed to a lot of wilderness sites, and then stumbled upon 2 people doing their master's dissertation research. And that's when I knew I could formally train to be a wildlife biologist. And then went up to my parents and said, this is what I want to do. And that's the convoluted, long drawn way into which I got into the profession. But I think your question is a little deeper. I didn't get into this thinking I'll do great science. By now, I had got a sense that nature is in trouble, and that's primarily human cost. And I would like to, in some way, contribute to, at the very least, slowing down the destruction and hopefully making a positive contribution. And I didn't know any other way of doing that other than joining the Forest Service or getting to be a researcher. I checked how the Forest Service works and even got the application forms, but did not apply because I soon learned that once you join the Forest Service, what you do, where you're posted, what role you play is out of your control. The government decides today you will be a zoo manager, tomorrow you will go and plant trees, all that kind of stuff. So that's why I chose this path. And the idea is that once you qualify, once you dive deep into a topic, there's a certain credibility, there's a certain internal understanding one gains, and that gives you a lot of confidence to then engage with much wider set of issues. That's a long-winded answer. I don't know. I gave you
What a great answer. Ravi, please tell us a bit more about your career. What kind of work did it cover?
When so I did my master's 83 to 85. Timing was excellent because that's the time the Wildlife Institute of India was being set up. And the first batch of research fellows were being recruited late 1985. In August, June, July, they advertised. August, they interviewed. 1st October 85 was the first batch of research fellows joining. And as luck would have it, I was part of that batch. And they advertised for about half a dozen projects, and we could apply for 2 or maybe 3. And once the process was over, they said, you choose whatever project you want. And I chose the lion project because I knew lions were highly endangered. The idea is to translocate, and that my research would have a direct connection to live conservation in real time. There was an elephant project, there was one more project, but lion project is what I wanted. Between making that decision in August and the time I joined on 1st October, I got a telegram saying, come join the snow leopard project. Now, this didn't make sense to me because snow leopard was not even advertised. So I went up and said, what's happening here? And they said, there's a Indo-US project, money has come through, we'd like to go up and do the study. Clearly, I was not going to do that, so I stuck with the lions. So 5 years PhD research, field-based for 4 years, came back, wrote up my thesis, and in 93 got selected to join the faculty at the Wildlife Institute. The Wildlife Institute of India is a very unique institution. It has scientists, it has in-service forest officers also serving there, and our mandate was research, education, training, and outreach. And being an autonomous institution of the government, you had plenty of reach. Forest officers used to come for training, getting trained in wildlife biology, wildlife management, and so on. And it also gave us an enormous reach throughout the country because these officers would go and serve and you have trained them, all that access and so on. So that was what I was doing for about 10 years. Then in late 2002, I got the opportunity to work with the UNDP office in Delhi. And that was in the biodiversity cell. That's primarily working with state governments and the federal government, designing projects, implementing projects on biodiversity. And the idea was that we are essentially a knowledge broker, try and get the best available knowledge from around the world to come to bear on those projects. I did that for 4 years. And since late 2006, I've been in the civil society space, primarily in leadership positions, led a variety of institutions. So my career is kind of strange. 85 to late 2002 with the Wildlife Institute, that's 17 odd years. And then 4 years with the UN, but on deputation from the Wildlife Institute. And since then, my average tenure has been between 2 and 3 years. I've kind of gone through several institutions, including Greenpeace in India. And that phase of my career has been largely institution building, providing leadership, networking, trying to make things happen both at the policy level and as well as the ground level. And since 2018, I've been playing the current roles in one way or the other that I currently do. And I'm also well into my 60s now. I realize that really my job is to make sure that I'm able to invest in the younger generation, facilitate their growth, hopefully inspire them, provide them enough and more opportunity.
In your ideal world, what does conservation look like and what does it not look like?
I think justice is a very important element of conservation. We often disregard justice by somehow elevating conservation to a higher plane and justifying whatever unjust means that are adopted to, within quotes, achieve conservation. I don't think there can ever be a compromise on justice, rule of law, human rights in the name of conservation. Now, I will be castigated for what I've said, but I'm willing to stick my neck out because the minute we start compromising on rule of law, it's a slippery slope. It will only gather momentum in the wrong direction. Conservation has to be bottom up. There is value for top-down, but we've seen top-down conservation work for more than a century, and we know what the impacts are. There are very, very rare cases where immediate action, a top-down directive is required, but to be able to sustain conservation, to be able to enshrine morality and ethical functioning, it has to be bottom-up. When rule of law is flouted by the powerful and the wealthy on a minute-by-minute basis, we often bring the heavy arm of law on very, very poor, powerless people in the name of conservation. And that, to me, is just plainly unacceptable. And this is across countries. This is across ecosystems. Conservation is in some sense a playground for the middle class and the wealthy, and very often conservation then results in consumptive forms of use, like tourism. While many people think tourism is non-consumptive, I know for a fact that tourism is very consumptive. And in South Africa, that can lead to hunting and all that kind of stuff. So at no point of time should, in the name of conservation, the rule of law be flouted.
Ravi, you've been championing and monitoring the issue of the export of cheetahs from South Africa and Namibia to India consistently over the last few years. You have consistently been saying that it's a mistake. Why?
On at least three grounds. One, it's deeply flawed scientifically. Two, it is against the rule of law in India. And three, we are operating, at least in South Africa, in a vacuum when it comes to scientific information. And I will elaborate on these three. We all know that cheetahs are low-density, wide-ranging species, which require thousands and tens of thousands of square kilometers to have a viable population. We all know India is 1.4 billion, the world's largest human population. And still a vast majority of the population is dependent on the land, on biomass for their day-to-day livelihoods, which then puts them directly in competition with any species which requires that kind of expansive land. Our average protected area is barely 200 square kilometers, and that is not going to work for cheetahs. If India is serious about this, we should have identified 8, 10, 12, 15,000 square kilometers in advance, not necessarily in a single patch, but connected and so on and so forth, but pre-identified, managed, monitored, prepared it before we bring the cheetahs. The first batch of cheetahs came in September of 22. It's going to be 3 years now. And we are still nowhere near locating that kind of habitat. So, and I'm on record saying that at best, they will turn out to be glorified safari parks. And unfortunately, my prediction seems to be playing itself out because there's just no space. And there are a few others who've been saying the same things, and we've all been castigated by saying, how do you know cheetahs have not existed in India for 70 years? How do you know this is the way they would behave? But these are African cheetahs coming, and there's no reason for them to behave in a different manner. And whatever has happened, whatever cheetahs that have been released, you've seen the videos as to the mess that we are in. Getting to the rule of law. The Supreme Court of India on 15th April 2013, that's more than 12 years ago, said lions from Gir have to be translocated to Kuno in letter and spirit within 6 months. Within 6 months was sometime in October of 2013. We are now in May of 2025. The lions have not been translocated. The same judgment said it is illegal for African cheetahs to be translocated to Kuno. The government of India went on appeal in 2016 saying that your judgment of 2013 is being misinterpreted as a blanket ban on African cheetahs coming to India. We will not disturb the plans to translocate lions to Kuno, allow us to explore other sites. That was the appeal in 2016. The court eventually in January 2020 gave the ruling that on an experimental basis, African cheetahs can be introduced in India, not reintroduced. Being African cheetahs, they can only be introduced in India in carefully chosen sites after due surveys And if things don't work out, we will reevaluate. The appeal said, no Kuno, we'll explore alternate habitats. The ruling has said what it has said. It set up a 3-member independent committee to monitor the work of the government. 2020 was peak of COVID. 2020, 2021, they did some field surveys, very few days. And of those few days, the majority was spent in Kuno, where they had no business to go to also. And when the action plan was released in early January of 2022, Kuno was identified as the site where African cheetahs can be released first. So you see the problem here. And the action plan also says it'll take a minimum of 15 years for the African cheetahs to establish a viable population in Kuno. And after that, we can consider reintroducing lions. So to me, the intent has never been honorable of the cheetah project. It's been to more continue to stall, delay, and prevent the translocation of Asiatic lions. It's not about conservation of cheetahs. Of course, the action plan also sets out this extremely ambitious objective of saying that the cheetahs will come and help restore, conserve open natural ecosystems, savanna, woodland, thorn forest habitats, something that the tiger has done for forests in India. So those are never going to be achieved if you hold your cheetahs captive, keep capturing them when they go out, and you have now, 26 cheetahs or something like that. How is that ever going to be achieved? And the lion translocation continues to be stalled. So that's the rule of law. Coming to South Africa, the way it's been pushed is that South Africa has a surplusing cheetah population. I've searched the literature. I've spoken to everybody who has credibility in doing work on cheetah ecology, cheetah population estimation. Nobody concurs with that view. I'm told that the population viability analysis is still in the last stages of being completed, so there's no data for a few years now, and the non-determinant finding has not been updated. So in the absence of that data, to reach any conclusion that South Africa has a surplusing population of cheetahs, which can be spared and sent to India, I think is not correct.
Thanks, Ravi. Where do you see this going?
As luck would have it, I was given the opportunity to give a public talk within a week after the 8 Namibian cheetahs came to India. This was at the Bangalore International Center. And this was a question that was asked then. So we're talking late September 2022. And I see no reason to change the answer that I gave then, which is cut your losses. Do not import any more African cheetahs. Do your best to manage, look after, ensure welfare of the cheetahs that you've already imported. Work on preparing the required habitat, connectivity, prey population, allow independent monitoring, and then maybe 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the line, India might have the habitat and the prey to host a cheetah population. Until then, this is Mickey Mouse. This is just playing to people's fantasies. This is not science. This is definitely not conservation.
What does the conservation community miss about this issue?
I don't know whether we have a united conservation community, which is the problem, especially in India. I don't know whether that's applicable internationally. I think the conservation community's major failing is lack of courage and hence a lack of a backbone. We are unable to speak truth to power. We are unable to stick to the science. Scientists are quite pliable, bending the science to meet what they think the politicians need. So there's a lot of blurring of lines and roles as a result. So whatever the leader says, then you try and create the science to make it real, sound good, make it happen. So I'm not able to answer your question because of the kind of situation we're dealing with when truth is at a premium. And if you look at the narrative, the official narrative on the project over the last 3 odd years, it's changed constantly. We hear nonsense about cheetahs from Africa growing winter coat in the Indian summer and monsoon, when physiologically it's impossible. It's day length that determines growth and dropping of winter coat. So that's the mess in which we are. That's the pitiable nature of the discussion that's going on. So I'm really not able to answer what they're missing. They seem to have missed the whole bus. There's not one bit that they are missing. But that might well be not missing. That
What are the lessons that we should learn from this debacle?
humility. Please be humble. Don't ever approach any issue with the arrogance that you know it all. Be willing to admit that you can also make mistakes. Be willing to listen to well-meant or not so well-meant criticism. Science is supposed to be self-corrective. If you don't listen to criticism, how will science correct itself? Do not rush these things. The Namibian MOU was signed weeks before the cheetahs came. The South African cheetahs were captured months before they were flown to India. So there has to be independent oversight. There really has to be accountability built onto all of this, which requires transparency. To me, those really are. I mean, if you get all of that right, rest of it will fall into place. At least that's what I think.
Having engaged extensively with the African conservation community, what is your impression of African conservation?
I don't know whether I've engaged with the conservation community. I've definitely engaged with the research community. I've definitely engaged with the animal welfare community. I've engaged with the conservation community, not as extensively, and to claim it's African also, maybe largely South African, is a more accurate way of looking at it. I see kindred spirits. I see people after just a single Zoom meeting who I trust. And I think in our line of business, if you can't trust people, you can't work with them. There is deep respect for all the challenges that you guys are facing. It's a completely different set of challenges compared to what's happening in India. But at the same time, our ability to, easily understand each other, given our extremely different contexts, be willing to listen, read up, help each other. It's been wonderful. I mean, it's only about 2-3 years since. I mean, Gus Mills goes back a long way, but most of the rest of the people I've met is in the last 2 or 3 years. And it's been quite remarkable, the amount of support I've received, the amount of love I've received, the constant shoring up of our spirits, sharing the little victories we have, not allowing the obstacles to bring us down. It's been wonderful.